Welcome to another episode of The Greatest Pod, where we discuss and debate what makes something great. I'm Ed Greer.
I'm Ron Swallow,
And I am producer Bill.
and today is our 100th episode.
Whew.
Yeah, 100 episodes of The Greatest Pod. And we decided we wanted to do something a little bit different to celebrate this 100th episode and really kind of delve deeper into the things we talk about. So we decided to talk about, as you know by the title, the greatest redefinition of nerd culture. That basically meaning like, where is nerd culture going from here on out? And is there even nerd culture anymore? Really?
That's the question that I think is going to be the most interesting discussion, because frankly, we're past time for the culture at large to redefine what like the nerd subculture even is. And we might even make the point that it no longer exists in any appreciable way. So that's what got me amped about this conversation.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely something that popped into my head because, literally I was bullied for reading comic books as a kid.
Sure.
And that is highly unlikely to happen right now, is my guess. I'm not a kid, but that's my guess.
Well, yeah, I think that's absolutely true. I also think we need to dive in head first and get the algorithm going.
Mm-hmm.
I'm the biggest Star Wars nerd. Now look,
No.
you all know me. I'm the dude who said, and I quote, Star Wars is the most hack fandom of all time. I said it with my chest, and I believe it. However, it's weirdly generational because there are gray bearded fuckers who, when they were kids from 1983 to 1999, they just kept the faith. You know what I'm saying? Like, and I'm talking about before the cartoons, even 83 up to those goofy ass cartoons. Before that, they're just reading Timothy Zahn books, looking at Dan Wolverton jams, Vonda McIntyre reading Truce at Bakura, that story I keep talking about, where it's about Luke with lightning burns. His adventure happens. He's still got lightning burns from the third Star Wars movie, and they want to say some story about what happened right after that. Those dudes kept the faith. They kept the fire lit. So they could say that they're nerds. But these new kids, how could you say you're a nerd? It was intravenously dumped into you.
Well, that's the thing that I think really makes this an interesting discussion, is this isn't about how fans or fandoms have changed. It's really about how the entire media landscape has changed.
Mm-hmm.
Because back in the days you're talking about, Ed, like Star Wars was a worldwide phenomenon that everybody was into at the time. So this whole idea that, nerd culture doesn't exist anymore because these things have gone mainstream, if that was the case, nerd culture would have died in the 70s with, the likes of Star Wars, Star Trek the movie, Superman the movie, because those were huge seminal events in pop culture. But the real thing that didn't happen was this concentrated multimedia blitz, where when something takes off, you continue to milk every dollar and every storytelling bite out of it for decades afterward. And I think that's a great call, Ed, that like the Star Wars trilogy happened, and for all anybody knew, they could just move on with their lives. And so the nerd subculture was always those people, and whether it was Star Wars or whether it was black and white zines, it was always those people that hung on to these relics that culture itself has declared either passé or not worthy, and made that a core part of what they were into.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and it's interesting because sci-fi has always been part of mainstream culture, but reading sci-fi probably hadn't been. Is reading lame, by the way, guys, anymore?
Very, very.
Is it still lame to read? I'm
not even being facetious. No, it very much is.
Okay, so at least but then my question becomes, is the true nerd culture people who read books now?
Maybe, but you know what the problem with that is people who read books are so lame. And like, this is not directed at you at all, Ron, but like this is 100% my honest opinion. Like, the subculture of people who read books is so lame that nobody will ever want to be identified with them ever. You know
Except
what I
for me.
mean? Well, but except for the people that are already in it,
Yeah.
which is a great definition of kind of what nerd culture was up until about circa 2010.
Right.
Yeah, that's what's so interesting to me is
Mhm.
like is because nerd culture has become pop culture. It
Mhm.
is a lot of these things like, okay, you want to make your argument about Star Wars, Ed? Like Jeff May, our a friend of the pod, has made the argument that Star Wars was never nerd culture because it was the best-selling movie of all time at the time that it came out, pretty much.
Right.
It redefined the blockbuster. It like kind of created the blockbuster, if I understand correctly. So how can the thing that created the blockbuster become what nerd culture is supposed to be, is the fringes of society, basically? You like the thing that other people don't like. Or is that not the case anymore?
Well, but like we were saying earlier, the people who there everybody got on board, and then 94% of people got off board.
Right.
Disappeared.
That's 6% of people who were just like, "What happened to Luke right after the third movie? What did they have
Does
kids? Did
does Luke ever
Chewbacca?"
get laid? What the
6
fuck?
6% of people were like, "I really fucks with that. I care about that." And they were nerds. That's what made them a nerd, because everybody wasn't doing that. You had the lunchbox, and you threw that motherfucker where the lunchboxes go when you start carrying the backpack and being a big boy. But some people were just like, "Nope, I love this lunchbox, and it's revered on my wall right here." That's nerd, you know?
Well, let me just point out that I think nerd culture and pop culture have always had this tenuous handshake. Because even when
Of
you
course.
look at comic books, right? Like comic books were the most popular medium in the country for about 3 years, from
Yep.
like 1939 to 1942. You know what I mean? And then they started going off a cliff. But it's like what we think of as being sort of this nerd subculture, because it was through all of our adult life or all of our lives, period. It used to be the definition of pop culture for that short period of time, in the
Mhm.
same way that Star Wars was. And I think the thing to understand is that when the blockbuster fades, there is a segment of people that hang on to any scraps of that thing, while the majority of people just move on to new ventures. And that's where I think
Mm.
that nerd culture has a huge overlap with the Venn diagram of world building, which is sort of a weird thing to say. Like, and this is where I think maybe the rubber meets the road with the past 10 years or so. For the longest time, and this also goes back to what you said about reading, Ron. Like the majority of people in the majority of the audience for the mass media did not want to invest in world building. People were people were out for instant gratification, one-off experiences, things that they could go and forget their troubles for a couple hours and then go on with their lives. And the nerds were the people that wanted to integrate facts and history and ancillary materials into their appreciation of that thing. But now, with the mainstreaming of the MCU and the fact that Disney has created, products for ages 2 to 92, it's almost become mainstream to be invested in the world building, invested in that larger story, in the specific niches and cracks in between the pavement of this story world. And to me, I think that's a lot where the definition of nerd culture starts getting lost, because it's like the minutia was always the home world of the nerds, but now the minutia has kind of gone mainstream.
Yeah, well, that's why they get you, all of these. And it's funny, but the term that came to my mind when we were first talking about this is niching down. When people
Mm,
tell you to do stuff with your YouTube channel or whatever, and they say this, they say that, they go, okay, niche down, become the podcast that talks about the last 10 minutes of the movie Heat. That's
mm,
the best way to become big, is to go so small and so direct that you're take over a whole market and then maybe expand from there,
yeah.
which is so weird. But it's also how we're doing with all of this. Like, they got lightsaber nerds, they really want to mess with kyber crystals and put them together and stuff, so there's a whole market, aftermarket of people putting together different types of lightsabers, people doing different stuff with that whole subculture that's probably pretty nerdy and pretty cool, but it is just marketing. You're not grabbing a pipe and making this, you know what I'm saying? That's why I kind of love cosplayers, honestly. They participate in the world building and they spend money. And sometimes they spend money buying costumes, but I just think the ones that I think all that's great, but the people who make their costumes, they love it and want to embody it, and that's what makes them nerds. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, that's interesting too, because there was a period of time where I felt like cosplay was going mainstream, and now I feel like it's back to being a niche. But I don't know, it was maybe around, just to throw a random date on it, I think it was like around 2013, 14, 15. Like there was a period of time when, you know, Sci-Fi Channel had on like these makeup competitions and costume competitions. And, you know, sort of fashion was colliding with like the DIY movement on the internet. And like suddenly like cosplay, like the cosplay pageant, for lack of a better word, at Comic-Con became like this huge thing that was being covered in the media. And then for some reason that just kind of faded. Like that was no longer just a huge talking point after a little while.
Yeah, they all went on to OnlyFans.
But you know what? So that's super interesting, though.
I mean, to be honest, I think it was a great idea. If I was, and by the way, there's dudes on OnlyFans who are dressed as anime characters doing great. Just to be clear, there are women as well, but there are also dudes on there. Obviously, there's more women making money because titties sell better than abs. I'm sorry, guys. That's just a fact. But absolutely, there are people who are making money on OnlyFans being cosplayers, playing video games, you know, streaming with a bikini on. Like, you know,
this is a weird thought that I'm having in real time. What if the new nerd culture is essentially like fetish culture? You know what I mean? Like the what's the one thing left that we don't really talk about in the mainstream, but there is like that super dedicated niche that like defines their identity with it. And whether it's people who are really into shipping or whether it's people, I'm not so much, I guess, talking about like, you know, subs and doms and people who are into that sort of thing, but even furries, I think, right?
That's what I was going to say. Furries to me was a group of people being like, look, this shit really turns us on and it is really awesome. And if you can't deal with it, well, I'm 8 feet tall with my from head to tip. Fuck with me if you want to. You know what I'm saying? Like,
and
furries
and
seem
you
so
don't
huge.
know, and you don't know who I am in this.
Right. Yeah. Dude, it's like seeing a clown at midnight, dog. I mean, it's so uncanny, you know? So dude, trust me, I wouldn't fuck with a furry.
And I'm cool with people just doing whatever they want to do on top of that. And I have friends who cosplay as couples. There'll be some couple from an anime and they'll cosplay as that and have a great time, and they embody the thing and they do sort of, it's almost like they're acting while they're doing it, you know? Did you do that, dude? And he was like, I worked out. Like, okay, bro. Thank you. He sounded mad that I asked him that too, by the way. He was very upset because it was like, clearly I work out. And also, I think you're judging me for working out and I don't like it. Like, and I was absolutely no, I wasn't. But you know, I could see that in the nerd culture. Like sometimes people be like, all right, bro, you just did a bunch of sit-ups and put on flag shorts and boxing gloves. Okay. We see what you're doing here. But at the same time, I respect all of that. And he did work hard for the thing. He also had some black eye makeup, which he did a good job on, I want to say. You know, it's
yeah, see, he wanted you to compliment his black eye makeup. It's like, how did you make yourself look beat up? Instead, you go like, oh, it looks like you have a lot of free time. That's what you did. That's what you did too.
Or you're like, hey man, where do you get your steroids? Like that's what I thought you were asking.
Yeah.
Hey, you on trend? You on trend, bro?
You on gear, bro? I mean,
I don't know what you guys just said.
That's steroids.
What I think is interesting about this conversation, though, is like it almost places nerd culture into an experiential place, right? Like in a world where the vast majority of like the movie going public is now invested in like tracking this multi-level story about superheroes across multiple forms of media, which used to just be, you know, the niche of the comic book nerd. Nerddom kind of moves over to like, all right, maybe we don't care as much about the facts and the figures and who knows what about what story. Maybe we care about the people who can live their truth. I don't know enough about the cosplay subculture to really speak on it, but it feels categorically different than even like the traditional definition of what we would think of as nerds.
Yeah, and LARPing. You guys know about LARPing, right?
Yeah, seeing the extra level, right? Because I definitely have seen the levels of anime nerds, like the anime nerds who love anime a lot and will go to a convention, but then they'll be like, if a regular anime nerd rolled up to them looking like they were at a convention, but it was just supposed to be regular,
Right.
and they saw that same person acting exactly as they act, but in the wrong milieu, that person's a nerd. I've definitely seen videos of people decrying other nerds, like trying to find the strata. Where is it appropriate to act like a total nerd and Naruto run up to a chick and start talking to her at McDonald's? You know what I'm saying? Like there's
Yeah.
these levels to the shit. You know, maybe if your abs are dope enough, you can pull that shit off, but most of the time not.
Oops.
I mean, confidence will go get you a long way, though. Like
I Naruto run down every staircase.
don't know if I needed to know that about you, right?
Yeah, it's a good balance, actually. Even when you have your arms down and back, it works pretty well for the balance.
Oh,
I love it. Yeah, I like to parkour across everything, but meaning I fall down every staircase and I just roll across every ramp.
Now I'm just thinking of Ed doing the Peter Griffin fall down a staircase, just like really aggressively.
Dude, I fight the chicken all the way down. But like the thing about, okay, we are talking about the redefinition of nerd culture. We have sort of started to broach the subject of, okay, this is where it starts to be like marketing, like this comic book, even like when we look at the comic book industry, it hasn't grown as much, and we've kind of talked about that subject on other podcasts. But it's like, I think we hit it on the nail on the head when Ron was talking earlier about books. Even reading a comic book is too much for these people. Like straight up, it's not. If you knew how many more adventures with these characters you could be reading, it would seem like that would just titillate them so to no end. But the act of opening it up and interpreting a picture and a word balloon and then doing it again and again and again and again for 22 pages, it's all too much for them. A comic book.
Well, you remember when we did when we were looking at how comic books were doing, they had the best year that they had ever had in 2020 and 21. Now, that was the pandemic. So part of me is like, okay, well, people were at home and just needed stuff to do. So I would be curious to see by, 2025, what happens in the next couple of years after that. Like maybe it goes back down again.
Yeah,
but that also encompassed other comics besides the big two. Like people,
Yes.
I think people put the work in to read anything else. There are people who won't read a Marvel comic that'll read 57,000 damn pages of manga, but they don't want to read no more Iron Man stories.
Right, and that was also I mean, it was the best year just in terms of dollars, right? And that was at a time when inflation was starting to take off.
True.
And as we talked about at the time, back in the days when Jim Lee was selling millions of copies of X-Men, the only comics anybody was really buying were the monthly floppies, and they cost, $1 to $1.50 a pop. Now monthly comics cost $4 to $5, and the majority of buying goes toward collected editions anyway, which are running, 20 to 30 or more dollars, depending on if they're hardcover, limited edition, whatever the fuck. So the fact that the bookstore market has taken off, collected editions have taken off in general, and even the monthly comics have ballooned in price. Again, I don't know that units shipped 20 and 21 would have been the best year ever. It's just the dollars.
There was a good amount of TPBs as well, but it is one of those questions is like, is that stuff still going to be the niche. When if in 10 years from now Marvel puts out its last, you know, sixth phase of Marvel or whatever, and nobody really is going, and it kind of fizzles out, and we go back to, you know, Bloodsport. What will people, you know, will it still be just like Ed said, where Star Wars, those 15 years, they'll just be the 6% of the population goes back to reading comics and it's back to being nerdy again? Or will it be something else? That's what's curious. That's what's interesting to me, honestly.
Yeah, I'm not sure. And I think the other X factor in that is like, what's going to happen to DC and Marvel as publishing companies if and when the movies start to fail? Because right now, like both of those companies, it's not that they're not operating at a loss, but as parts of these bigger multinational conglomerates, you know, Warner Brothers Discovery and Disney, respectively, like they're not moving a huge needle. Like neither one of those companies need to be publishing comic books, but one of the big reasons why they continue to is because it is such a lucrative IP farm for their other media. So if that other media is no longer bringing in the dollars that they want or need, I don't know what happens to those comics, which then broaches the question of like, let's think of a world where Marvel and DC have gone away completely. I'm curious how many of the quote unquote nerds who would be reading the comic books anyway would actually stick around for a world of creator owned Image books and Dark Horse books and things like that. Or are they really just nerds for the Fantastic Four, Batman, Wolverine, whatever?
Yeah. Or like the legacy. I think this is going to be interesting. We should talk about some of the different sorts of nerds. Not try to be categorization, but like legacy nerds are big nerds. Legacy nerds are a big batch of nerds. My grandpappy liked Captain America, and I like Captain America. I actually, you know, I like Wolverine more, but I tell my pappy I like Captain America best. that shit. There's a bunch of those, and a bunch of those people are like super fucking mad that their kids don't have the same exact comics drawn by John Buscema that they grew up with. That's kind of a weird section of nerds in of itself.
No, I agree with that. And I think I've talked about it on the podcast before, but like I've bought my niece, who's just kind of getting to a strong reading age, some young readers graphic novels, but it's not like they're, you know, Fantastic Four. It's like Babysitter's Club and things that have nothing to do with Marvel or DC legacy media. And she really enjoyed it. But like, I'm not going to get butthurt if she doesn't want to read Spider-Man. You know what I mean? Like, I don't care. But I agree with you, Ed. There are people out there that think that's a problem. And I just don't grok that mentality. Like, I'm just at a point now where if Marvel and DC disappeared, you know, there'd be some tears to be shed, but like, it's no big loss because the art form would live on.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the last comics I bought are right here. Bought them at Emerald Knights.
Nice.
Put them up to the thing. I don't know if you can see these well, but I'll just put the first one up there.
Oh, that's supposed to be really good, that 8 Billion Genies.
Yeah, I just started reading it, and it is super fascinating. The world has hit 8 billion people, and then everybody gets their own genie when the world hits the population of 8 billion. And then some guy makes a wish that nobody's wishes could affect anybody else's lives. And that changes the whole vibe of the thing, because at first people are wishing for a lot of stuff that is not great for other people.
Sure.
And then now everybody has to try to figure out wishes that help them out but don't harm other people. It's pretty fascinating. And there's obviously more drama and stuff, et cetera, et cetera. And it's well drawn and it's super interesting. And I love comics, and I would love for them to go that way. Just people coming up with interesting stories and concepts and being like, here's my interesting concept. I turned it into a comic book.
It's, you know, I think in a lot of ways, just listening to you talk and thinking about this, Marvel and DC kind of hold comics back in a way. because
Mhm.
like comics should really be this interesting middle ground between like literature and magazines, right? And it should be sort of like an arty, snobby subculture in a way. Um, not to shit on the fact that comics have always been part of the low culture. I think that's part of the appeal as well. But like, if comics are going to be a niche, and they have been ever since, well, maybe since the 60s, because they did surge again once Marvel really got its act together. But comics have been a niche since the 60s. And like, if they are going to be a niche, it would be better if they were more of an art and literary niche as opposed to like a costumed muscle men and sexy women niche. But I don't know if that's separable now. I just don't.
Well, okay, that gets to a big point that I wanted to talk about because okay, like between the times that you're talking about where every working man had a comic book in his pocket, then there's like 20 years where that is definitely not the case, and we get into like what the 50s around there, or easing on into the 60s, and that's the big, congressional hearings. It's poisoning the minds of the youth. You can't put crime. EC Comics is punished classically because they're the biggest publisher. But I also looked at a big book of Jack Kirby's works before Marvel, and there's a monster section of it, and it's just like every week there'd be 4 or 5 8-page stories in this magazine, and he would do like 3 or 4 of them or whatever, and every week there was these new characters and a new monster and some kind of O. Henry twist at the end, and it was just like this idea factory of such magnitude. And then we get stuck with what's Captain America doing this week. Oh, Spider-Man swung by the window.
Right.
Each one of
But
these issues had 4 John Carpenter's The Thing in them, or 4 Indiana Joneses, or an Indiana Jones, a John Carpenter's The Thing, an Alien, and fucking Aliens in one little
and
magazine, you know?
and
Mhm.
each of them were complete stories, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And the
And
ones that weren't were like, whoa, this is crazy. We're gonna give this guy another shot to wow us. It was like wrestling or something. These books would come out and just demand another chapter. But it was rare.
well, and I assume that once those started being like that, when people were like, "I need another chapter of this," that's when people's brains went, "Oh, if people need another chapter of something, what could we do if we got characters who needed extra chapters and then interconnected with each other on top of that?" And so, in order for Cap to get what's going on with Captain America, you got to read the Spider-Man. And but wait, you can't just read that Spider-Man. Now you got to read where these Spider-Man came from to get
Mhm.
up to the
Well,
part,
I mean, that's really Stan Lee's great invention.
yeah.
Is
Mhm.
that level of interconnectedness between the different titles in the Marvel stable?
Yeah,
Mhm.
dangerous.
I mean, it is. I
I
don't
mean, in a
think
good
that's
way.
necessary. Yeah, that's the thing. Like, I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. It definitely was a huge paradigm shift. I think
Mhm.
theoretically, in a healthy market, there'd be room for any version, right? There'd be room for anthologies of 8 to 10 page stories. There'd be room for big ass novelistic adventures in the vein of like Walking Dead or Invincible. There'd be room for, miniseries and original graphic novels. Like, all that should exist. I think for me, it's just trying to pinpoint like what who who were the nerds in any era previous to this, and who are the nerds now, and who will the nerds be. And the only reason I think that that's the salient question is like, if this stuff that we're talking about goes back to being quote unquote nerd culture and not the greater pop culture, like that's going to be such a huge redefinition of like television, movies, comics, to a certain extent, even like novels. Um, there's just been such a mainstreaming of the superhero aesthetic, the superhero story type, just the sort of like arch characters and good versus evil and focus on action. I mean, it bleeds over into things like Fast and the Furious, which have essentially become superhero movies without costumes. It's like that is so ubiquitous across pop culture. If and when it falls out of favor, I'm just curious, like, what the landscape ends up looking like across all of culture, you know?
Or maybe
Well,
it doesn't
yeah.
fall out of culture completely. Maybe it gets down to the 30% or 40%, and then
I think the question
something else
becomes
pops
like,
up.
yeah, the question becomes like, what's it replaced with?
Yeah.
And maybe it's not any one thing, but like, even the crack about OnlyFans and all joking aside, like there's something to be said for people who are willing to put their money into consuming content by subscribing to an OnlyFans. And that's significant because as much as they might do both, the money that they're putting into OnlyFans could go toward movie tickets or comic book subscriptions or streaming service subscriptions or whatever. And it's not just about where the money's going, but where the money is going is an indicator of where the eyeballs are going, which is where the brains are going. So
Yeah.
it's like, I just think
Well,
it's such an interesting question.
it's interesting because, I mean, look, if we're going to be real, it's a world I'm not in, but TikTok has 120 million daily users that are consistent.
Yeah,
And
which is also here's my only thing I'll say about that. That is tiny compared to Facebook at its height. And
yeah,
now Facebook is so passe that the company may as well be imploding.
yeah. Well, and it is slowly imploding. It keeps staying alive, but it is slowly imploding.
Well, I
And then
think
here's the other
go ahead.
the other thing is, I mean, YouTube is interesting too. Like, I mean,
Hmm.
there's things that we kind of sort of halfway missed because we were busy being into the things we were into. And a lot of like people are making full-time. Our buddy Rich Slayton, he has made a living from his YouTube channel and announcing for a game that he loves to play. And he's now making a great living doing that. And I play this game, Raid Shadow Legends. I watch these like 5 or 6 dudes videos every single day, pretty much, which is ridiculous and
Well,
uber
and
nerdy. But
but
maybe that's where it's going to.
but what I think
Is
is interesting about that, Ron, like you might think it's uber nerdy, but that entire collection of subcultures has sort of hopscotched over being embarrassed about their subculture. Like
100%.
there's nothing like, oh, I'm not going to really talk about this about either being on YouTube or about watching YouTube. Like
Yeah,
that in and of itself is just kind of mainstream.
yeah.
Right. Well,
That's
because it's born in the internet, though. Like, if YouTube was a TV show where people sent in tapes, and if your
Mm,
tape was selected, everybody got to see it, and sometimes they would ridicule the shit out of you, and the whole world got to see you be ridiculed. It'd be a whole different thing.
mm.
But these type of shit is born in the internet age where everybody's trying everything and nothing is permanent. It seems like we grew up and it seemed like the internet was permanent. These kids grow up with a fearlessness and a experimentation, and they get an F on a test. Here come a crying ass TikTok about it. I would be mortified. I'd jump out a window if my friends ever saw me crying over some bullshit at school. But these
Mm.
little fucking losers, boy, the likes, the likes supersede any concept of shame that they have. Matter of fact, they've been taught that shame is bad. Anybody make you feel ashamed is a piece of shit, which is true 86% of the time. But
Yeah.
that 14 is strong as fuck, bro. Keep your fucking
You,
tears to yourself about shit
oh,
like that. About
okay.
shit like that.
No,
You know?
but so this is an interesting tangent. Like within that idea of the things I do online, I should not be ashamed of. Maybe the real nerd subculture are the people who are into essentially like tech bro utopianism. Are
Oh,
you
interesting.
are you guys aware of Decentraland?
Oh boy.
I,
kick
I
kick
don't
it for
think
the
I
people in
am.
the back. Yeah.
So Decentraland is essentially like metaverse version 1, and it promised to be, right, everything that like Ready Player One would have you believe the metaverse could be.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And there was a group of like 40, 50,000 people who were early adopters. And this thing is, I think, still online, but it essentially just balled up into one thing, like virtual reality existence with sort of libertarian internet commerce with some of the trappings of a social network. And so within the limitations of current technology, your avatar could wander around a graphicized version of the internet and go and like buy land, which is essentially, you know, just visual space in Decentraland, and sell. It's essentially like turning the Amazon storefront into an interactive virtual reality storefront. And it absolutely did not take off at all, even though they were very early in on trying to like make Bitcoin the currency of Decentraland. There's a bunch of articles and YouTube videos that have been written about this if you want to learn more. But the point being that like there's this hardcore dedicated subset of people who are still there and trying to keep it alive, despite all evidence that it is a huge fucking failure, that are just believing, no, we're a few breakthroughs away from living in Ready Player One, where our entire interface with the internet becomes, I'm a video game character running around an actual virtual world like Wreck-It Ralph or, you know, Ready Player One. And
can I just say, by the way, that when you watch the movie Ready Player One or you've read the book, their reality is a fucking nightmare.
Right.
They live in trailers on top of trailers that are boxes that they live in, and they can barely afford that. It's a nightmare. And I think people forget that part. Like, yeah, I guess you're got something going on in the virtual world, but you're a giant loser otherwise. And your life is like a corporate nightmare.
But that is why I'm calling these people the new nerd subculture, because they are essentially clinging on to this idea that if I invest, not even monetarily, but if I invest enough of myself into this belief that this thing is going to deliver me a whole new life, like somehow I'm going to avoid all of those obvious pitfalls that even the movies that it's based on are telling you are there. And so it's like this weird combination of blind faith and abject corporatism. Like, I just have to believe that the corporations, and it's, you know, they would say that they're anti-corporate because they're all about free, you know, it's very techno-libertarian. But I don't know, man, it's just this idea that like you're so invested in something that the wider culture has so completely either ignored or written off. Right? Like those are the people that I see in the modern milieu that are doing the thing that like people reading Star Wars novels in 1988 are doing.
Well, yeah. I mean, but that was always what it was about. Like the people who go, I don't get how people who read comics or were smart or watched Star Trek or whatever would ever be crypto bros. I certainly understand that because I like those things, and the values that they instilled in me made me not be able to fall for crypto bro stuff. But it is that like what was I'll speak for myself. What was my stock and trade as a young kid? Knowledge of fake dudes and their abilities and shit that I could regale people with. I'd say something funny about it. I knew something. So people like, who was that dude who drew that? And I would know it or whatever. My stock and trade, my thing that I traded capably was information about fake bullshit. You know what I'm saying? It's always been like an intrinsic value system, and you just get where your currency is accepted, right? And those Bitcoin dudes are the same way, down to the T.
And let me build on that. Think about, so I came into like the comic book subculture on the tail end of the big boom. But essentially, those people who were all in on comics through the 80s into the early 90s ended up recreating the media landscape. It's people like J.J. Abrams and Taika Waititi and James Gunn who are now the most powerful people in Hollywood that were nerds at a time when, you know, comics was still a nerd subculture. And so in a lot of ways, like there is precedent for like, no, if you are the person that can just rise to the top amidst this subculture, eventually you might be proven right. You know what I mean? Like, as you're sitting there and you're, if you're 13 years old in 1986 and Watchmen and The Dark Knight Returns have just blown your mind, and you have a vision for how, like, if we could just take this and show it to hundreds of millions of people, it'll change their fucking lives. 20, 30 years down the road, you actually do that. And it does. You know what I mean?
What's interesting to me is, like, what's coming to my brain is, if something fuels creativity and then you gain power from that creativity, from the thing that fueled you, then that becomes the modern culture. So what is the thing that's going to fuel creativity? So, like, no offense, like, okay, so one of my problems with using those tech bros living in, what was it called?
Decentraland
is that's an old school, and my old school version of nerds, like, just clinging on to some shit that nobody gives a fuck about, and not wanting to learn social skills or how to talk to a girl. You know what I mean? Like,
but hold on, like, I would just argue that those were the people who were working on the internet in the 70s.
Again, yes,
right,
100%. But things fueled their creativity to do that. And that's what's interesting to me, is people getting what fuels creativity.
Right.
Now,
so
is what I'm saying. My idea is that who's the next James Gunn in 20 years, and what is fueling their creativity right now? Is it James Gunn? Because it's probably not.
And he's he's thinking about Needle dropping some dope ass, really classic 2019 Doja Cat songs onto some space battle in the future.
100%.
Yeah.
Well, but I mean, my mind then goes to video games, because if you think about, like, what is it that kids for the past 10 years have been super invested in and are having those conversations like, man, if we could just fucking show this to people, it would blow their minds, is video games.
Like Last of Us.
Yeah. And I think to a certain extent, we're kind of going to get into a trial by fire here. Last of Us was big. The Sonic movies were big. Super Mario Brothers movie opened huge. Like, and there are a ton more video game adaptations in the pipeline. And so that's sort of an open question, but, like, that is almost yoked to the superhero boom, right? Because the superhero boom is still going on as well. And they really play to a lot of the same sensibilities, like fantastic worlds, fantastic powers, action first, very, like, big archetypal stories, blah, blah, blah. The question becomes, like, what is tickling the imagination of elementary school kids right now? And the thing that worries me is that companies have become so good at exploiting whatever properties they already own that there's not space for just janky ass bullshit that was cobbled together like He-Man or Thundercats to exist. You know what I mean? Because now it's just all, hey, we've got a version of Spider-Man for every age. We're going to start you on Spider Babies, and then you move up to Spidey and his Amazing Friends, and then we've got the Into the Spider-Verse movies, and then you get into the Marvel Universe proper. And by that time, you're a teenager. And it's like, where is the room for kids to just discover weird shit?
That's a great question. I don't have kids.
Right. I mean, I think that's where all of us maybe have a deficiency in this conversation.
Wait a minute.
And thank God.
I mean, honestly,
I don't want to understand having crazy hormonal people in here looking at this fucking Chinese deviltry on the TikToks. I really think
Chinese deviltry,
dude. Because, like, honestly, the thing that's what the oldsters are so worried about is that something that's so indispensable to our children, it comes from a foreign source that they think we're having this big fight with. Newsflash, you can't fight with China when they own you. Okay, you can't fight with people
It's a
who
little more
own you.
nuanced than that. I'm
I
not going to
know,
co-sign that,
but
yeah.
okay, watch TikTok never ever be regulated to any degree ever.
Well,
And
sure.
I'll ask why that is, and you can tell me something that makes more sense than my rant. But the bottom line is, come on, dude, we come on. So like, and there isn't any money in stopping the marketing to kids via things like TikTok, via the songs that you play over the little dances that you do, or just all these different ways to inject new media, be that be
The
video or audio. It's like a perfect delivery system for any niche that you want to be down with.
Mm.
Yeah, the only way it'll ever get stopped is if you prove without a doubt that they're making kids not capitalists. Then you will see that shit shut down in
Well,
a fucking
Okay.
okay, well,
millisecond.
commie TikTok is a fucking thing for
Oh, no,
real. And I'm not
100%
saying I'm
it
not
is.
down with it either. Those chicks are pretty hot, but commie TikTok exists.
Well,
100%.
let me take a less favorable look at nerd subculture, which maybe is a good illustration of what you're just saying, Ron. If you think about it, nerds up until the modern era were the people who would rather consume than produce. And again, like I said, this is a harsh criticism, and it's probably not 100% true. But generally, like your nerd subcultures are the people who ate up the things that other people were producing that weren't even, call it quote unquote, good enough to become mainstream. And I think one of the things that prevented quote unquote mainstream audiences from really getting on board with all the stuff that the nerds consumed is just because they had other shit going on that they were concerned about. And whether that was, you know, who was winning the football game or whether that was supporting their families or whatever the fuck, like life happened. But certainly in an era of TikTok and Instagram, you've got an entire generation of people who are just raised to be mindless consumers. And it's almost like going back to the tech bro thing, not that they're smart, but the only people that are left that are like more concerned about making money than they are about consuming this media are weirdos. If you think about it, like those are the weird kind of shunned people where it's like, I got to go get my grind on and fucking figure out how to hustle myself $1,000 when the majority of other people are out here just fucking watching whatever's on the phone.
You figured it out, Bill. I think the newest minted nerd culture is hustle culture. Hustle culture poisons everything. I mean, that's my opinion, but like hustle culture, the Gary V, hey, you don't need to go to college. Just go to a lot of estate sales and pick up like an armoire that's like for like $100, flip it for $2.22. What the fuck? It's all these just ridiculous plans. Plots and plans, pots and pans.
Yeah.
All these ridiculous garbage ways to 5-step programs of how to do this, that, or the other. That's the new nerd culture. I think I slipped into that for a minute. And I was getting a lot of Gary V, a lot of like, look, man, all you got to do if you got would you take $100,000 or a meeting with Jay-Z? If you don't take the meeting with Jay-Z, you're a fool because he could teach you this just idiotic, almost like idolatry ass capitalism bullshit, Svengali garbage. That is a new nerd subculture, and the Bitcoin guys are right in there because they're like, yo, I see value nobody sees evangelically. I see value nobody sees, and I'm gonna cash in on it like Daniel Plainview before anybody gets it.
Well, that's if you think about their characteristics, sorry, Ron, just to quick jump on what Ed was saying. They have their own language that they speak, all these buzzwords and things that outsiders are just like, what the fuck are you talking about? They have this mythology that they keep really close track of like, this is how Gary Vee made his money, and this is how Mark Cuban made his money, and then they have this sense of superiority where it's like the minute you're not down with what they're talking about, it's like, look at this fucking loser. I mean, that's what nerds were in the 80s. Like, oh, you don't know what issue of Spider-Man like Mary Jane first appeared in? Fucking loser. And it's like, meanwhile, the mainstream culture thinks you're the loser, but like within your subculture, you've insulated yourself. I think there's tons of similarities between hustle culture and old school nerd culture.
Hustle culture is a newly minted nerd culture. I think another one is probably those people who are just like, awesome at lip syncing. I think in the future we're gonna go back to this time and be like, my man, motherfuckers was lip syncing before, but lip syncing was so uncommonly. It was so uncommon to be great at it that there was a group named Milli Vanilli that got like a Grammy while lip syncing the whole time, and nobody deduced what the fuck was going on. But then when they found out what it was, people willingly did it, and it was known that they were lip syncing, but they still got popular because of their face motions while they did it. And now middle-aged housewives could be as funny as Bernie Mac as long as they line their fucking mouths up with the fucking bit, right?
I mean, and to just to add on to that, it's also the era when dancing is completely removed from emotion and originality and just becomes like, if you can just repeat what somebody else has done, you're a great fucking dancer. I mean, it's all that shit.
Yeah. And if you're white and you take all the sauce off of it, you might make $1 million selling it to other white people. Late night, they'd be like, hey, little white girl who did not make up any of these dances, sanded off all the hard parts and don't go hard. Watch her do this for 20 minutes. Meanwhile, there's a black girl popping her gum. Just, oh my God. I would rip this shit up right now. I would rip this up right now on Conan O'Brien or whatever.
They're like 40 years in the future, people are going to be looking at old footage of raves and being like, they're all doing their own thing. Like, what the fuck is this? Why aren't they dancing together?
Yes, this isn't dancing. They're all doing their own thing. They're like expressing themselves or something. And that is not dancing. If there's one thing I know, that's what it is not.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Oh my God, dude.
I mean, look, guys, I'm not going to say those things don't exist on TikTok. However, maybe fix your fucking streams, okay? Because I get improv dance ladies and guys who like are literally like making up shit on the fly, and I get weird goth chicks singing about murdering men. All right, so
our point being, Ron, that those are the nerds in this bleak new future. Those are the nerds. The people who are doing the original things are the nerds.
That's so interesting. That's so interesting. Yeah. Let me say this. What occurred to me, and I think this is the bad part of nerd culture, and it's one we've talked about before, the rightness. If you ever say you are 100% right about a thing, I don't trust you. Because you want to know who says they're 100% right or that they have all the answers? Guys like Trump. Guys like that dude you said, all you got to do is do these 5 things and now you will be successful. You do anything else, you're looking at failure, buddy. I got the answers for you. All you have to do is listen to me. I can fix everything. Anybody who says that, do not fucking trust that person. They're not a good nerd. They're a bad person, and they will be our downfall. Anyways, so I just wanted to bring that out because when I heard you guys talking about these different subcultures, that's the thing that occurred to me so hardcore. And the thing that I think I used to do, like when I was a kid, like before my best friend was like, why don't you listen to this fun rap stuff? I was like, this is bullshit. That's not fucking music. They're not even playing instruments. What the fuck is happening? And I was wrong because everything is music and anything can be interesting. And you're allowed to dislike anything you don't want to like, like if you want to not like something, that's great. But to say something is not music or something is not art is ridiculous. Unless, of course, you talk about techno. And really, then you can go fuck yourself. No, I'm just kidding. But you see, techno's not for me. That's the words, by the way. This thing is not for me, but if you enjoy it, that's awesome. In fact, tell me what you enjoy about it and then listen to that person. I just want to bring that stuff up because I can see where I think you're right that this nerd culture thing can go a bad way.
But check this out. Okay. I agree with you that the new way maybe isn't going to be that because gatekeeping is now super passe, actually.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? The fucking online, if you're terminally online as I am, that's one of the lamest things you can do besides saying lame because that's ableist. If you're terminally online, you'll know that. But yeah, one of the lamest things you can do is be a gatekeeper and stop anybody from enjoying whatever. It's one of the lamest things you could do. But now these kids hate gatekeeping so much that they let all type of ridiculous bullshit in that sucks.
Well, that's the essence of TikTok, right? That's the essence of TikTok.
It
is
is.
like
Yeah.
anything you want to do can be entertainment.
Mhm.
I think one of the things that Ron was talking about, though, with like that whole idea of like, everybody has their own tastes and anything can be, a phenomenon to the right group of people, that broaches the subject of what can make money, right? And like what, beyond just like what individual piece of art can make money, like what cultural narrative can make money. And I think it's no secret that like superheroes have really taken over pop culture at a time when two huge things coalesced: the sort of the revolution in animation and special effects, and America going through post 9/11, and this idea that like the world is in a secret war, but it's not with nations, it's with these rogue elements, and who can we trust, and we got to show we're strong, and blah blah blah. And you put those two things together, and the narrative of the superhero becomes something that's very valuable to sell and very easy to receive on the other end, right? And that's where I think it goes back to some of this Gary Vee stuff, because if you think about 20 years from now, there are going to be multimillionaires and billionaires who got their start listening to Rogan, Gary Vee, whoever the fuck else, right? I didn't go to college because Joe Rogan told me not to go to college. I started my first business using Gary Vee as a blah, blah, blah. I read the 4-Hour Work Week by so-and-so, and I took these lessons, and like now those people are billionaires. That's a great narrative for media for larger media, corporate media to sell, because number one, it fits the American dream. You can bootstrap yourself to greatness. Number two, it gets people invested in how to put this. So the storylines that you become invested in are also things that those same corporate media can exploit, right? So like if you're lionizing a business figure, that means that business is going to make money, and anybody who's going to want to invest with that business leader is also going to make money off of you, which is the same way, like, you see so many hero initiatives and everyone's a hero now, and that's just like this ubiquitous branding. Well, it's because places like Marvel, Disney, Warner Brothers, whatever, have their own products reinforced by the culture talking about heroes and superheroes and blah, blah, blah. So I think that's just a way of sort of breaking down why I think like this hustle culture could really mature over the next 20 years and become something like, on the plus side, that motivates an entire new era of entrepreneurism outside of just, the .com stuff that's been happening since the 2000s. But on the negative side, really goes a long way toward further propping up the American myth of individualism and bootstrapping and yada, yada, yada.
But let me make this argument. It could also really inspire some people who like community. And here's my thought process on this. I listened to a bunch of different political podcasts, and one of them was this one called The Wilderness. And they went and talked to a bunch of Trump voters who had voted for Obama. They voted for Obama for 2 terms, then voted for Trump. And then they also did just general like market research about why people are doing what they're doing, what they would like to see changed. And obviously there's the normal kitchen table issues. There's, your normal stuff. But one of the big things that people would like to see is an end to divisiveness. The big thing that people were always saying is we'd love to see people come together and actually solve problems. So now let me say, there will be a few people in a niche who believe that they can be the person or the group of people that form communities to bring people together. And I'm not even talking about both sidism or blah, 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 but I'm talking about the creativity will be pushed by this want of people coming together. That's what a thing I think could happen that will not be as cynical and as terrible as tech bros.
No, I think you're wrong only in so much as like it's pretty much been proven at this point that when people say they want community and people working together, what they actually mean is I want everybody to agree with me so we can move on and address other things. Like
That's
nobody really.
possibly true.
No, it is true. Like there have been studies.
So when they
this.
say that because it feels better saying I want people to come together than saying I'm right and I need people to listen to me.
Right.
Well, okay, but this is another.
That's
thing.
interesting.
I'd like to inject this right at this entry point right here. Is there a social justice nerd? Is there an alt-right nerd? Where did they come from? Because I number one, I know that's
yes.
what I just said is true on both of them. Yes, they're yes on the yes. And that inflection point on issues like that is where they come to like battle out with their nerd facts. Like the alt-right nerd has that FBI crime statistics ready to go. This many dark skinned guys did this, and the SJW has their stats ready to go. States that have a bunch of gun deaths, duh, and then they got all the type of, and it's just this battle of, I don't want to even say alternative facts. Sometimes they're just battles of facts, the facts you choose
that you have a biased opinion about. Yeah.
Well, I think what's really interesting about that question is nerds have traditionally, and again, this is maybe harsh toward nerds, but largely nerds have embraced the things that they've embraced as a way to kind of opt out of those conversations.
Yeah, nerd was rebellion,
think that,
right?
I get that, but I think that they think that. But it's like, oh, I opt out of the political conversation. Oh, Captain America punching Hitler? Yes, please. Like, I just don't think that's how it works. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So it's just like I was watching. I hate. We talked about greatest sports movies, so this is germane. I'm really disappointed in old age Phil Jackson, the coach of Michael Jordan. He said some things, and he's been proven to say some things that are really just fucking stupid. And he said that in the bubble, he stopped in the NBA bubble when the COVID was rampant, that basketball players played in a bubble and they determined who the champion was, and it was the Los Angeles Lakers. And he said he stopped watching in the bubble because they had slogans on the court. The slogan was Black Lives Matter. Now look, I don't care I don't care that the organizational heads bought houses. What are they supposed to do? Not buy houses? Whatever they did with the money, they absconded with the money and didn't solve racism for everybody. Whatever whatever. As a statement of fact, that shouldn't perturb you on any level, especially when you made your entire living off the backs of pituitary case Negroes. Your whole fortune comes from tall Negroes doing stuff. And you can't acknowledge that their fucking lives matter on a court, or it'll drive you away from the game. Suck a dick. That sucks. There's no amount of championship rings that can overcome that. So go eat a dick and chomp on the dick with the 11 championship rings on. But all that being said, that is an interesting aspect of like the nerddom of basketball, right? There are basketball nerds all over the place. Are they being fractured by the narrative? The people who are nerds about the narratives, nerds about who John Brand is sleeping with, versus the nerds who know everybody's shooting percentage. I think that nerds come out of the woodwork with the internet. You know what I'm saying?
I agree with that. I mean, I think going back though, like politics is an interesting element of this because to a certain extent, I'd make the argument that like radical activists have always been nerds in so much as they're a part of the culture that eats, sleeps, and lives their ideology, and the wider culture does its best to ignore them.
Yes.
So in a very liberal definition of the word nerd, like they have always been nerds. I think though that kind of leapfrogs what we're talking about here, which I'm not trying to get us to not talk about it, but I'm just trying to put it in context of like, that leapfrogs the conversation about like, what's the pop culture that, you know, the weird fringes are going to be into in the coming decade or two. The only reason I don't think it's going to be alt-right versus social justice is because those things are so fucking mainstream, even if there are a ton of people that don't want them to be. You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Yeah. Well, I mean, even the subcultures they're in, because they'll be like trad wives for abortion.
Yeah.
They'll be like, black dudes who speak Japanese who are also hoteps. You know what I'm saying? It's just
Yeah,
like
yeah, yeah.
Dude,
all types of shit.
you know what it's gonna be? It's gonna be people who don't like tech.
Mm.
We got a
Luddites.
fair amount of those when the pandemic hit. All those crunchy granola fuck faces spreading
They're
disease. I said it. A lot of
yeah.
those motherfuckers went crazy all the way back around. What that not the bell curve, but that horseshoe effect where you go all the way around
Yeah,
to
yeah,
the
yeah.
opposite of your political ideology.
Yeah.
Yeah, dude. You're
There's
right.
gonna be that. It's gonna be people who decide that they don't wanna be in social media because they don't wanna feel like shit anymore, and they're just gonna be like, "No, I sit at home and read books, and I go to my job, and I don't pay attention to any of that shit."
Okay, wait. Is this the
And that's
proper
gonna be the
time?
new nerd.
Okay, but is this the proper time for me to tell you guys that I'm getting a flip phone? Is this the
Oh
proper
shit.
time? I,
Are you
I think
really?
I think I'm gonna do it, dude. I saw my buddy Ari Manis at the Comedy Store. He whipped it out of his pocket and it sang like Excalibur coming out of the fucking lake.
Ah.
And he just looked to see if he got a text from anybody. And the text was hella blocky and weird and so hard to probably do on that phone.
Yeah.
So nobody had texted him. There was nothing there. And he didn't look at it. I watched him later. He didn't look at it again for 25, 35 minutes, which nobody does with a modern phone.
Nope.
And I asked him, "Do you have Snake on it?" He says, "I have it, but I don't play it." And I was like, "Ooh, sexy." I'm sorry, dude. I just want to interject that. I think I might fuck around and do it, bro.
I mean, I gotta be honest with you. I think that there might be a group of people that realize that being on this stuff has been somewhat bad for us. And yes, there are some great things that it has brought about. We can all argue that, and we've argued that before on this exact same show. But I do think there's a group of people who are just they're not gonna be on TikTok, they're not gonna be on anything.
Hmm.
Maybe they'll watch the news from time to time, but it's gonna be Reuters or the BBC or something like that. And then probably they're just gonna get a newspaper rather than like it's gonna be like they only have an email for work, and that's because email requires them to do it. Work
Dude,
require. You know what I mean? Like
a
that's gonna
bespoke
happen
a
when they go
bespoke
home.
newspaper that they get.
Yeah. When they
So
go home, they're not going to answer emails from their bosses. That shit doesn't exist for them anymore. And then what's going to happen is the creativity that comes from that is going to turn into movies where instead of a world of technoverse, it's going to be the fantasy is going to be people who have no technology.
it's just movies about like outdoorsmen and lumberjacks
Yes.
and people raising pigs and shit.
Dude, the lumberjack renaissance movies of
Lo-
2046.
Are you fucking kidding me?
Oh my God. I think you might have did that,
I
Ron.
mean,
You made that
when you
happen
guys were
somehow.
talking about it, I was just thinking about like, what's the one thing that's going to be the fringiest shit you could possibly do, and that's not beyond anything.
I was
Oh,
also going to
dude.
say, Ron, you've really brought this full circle, and that book nerds will continue to be nerds because
Yes.
those are the people that are doing what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Dude. Oh, and I could see it going all the way around to like now there's communities of these just small villages, these communities, right? And these people and you kind of just talk through a tin can on a string or whatever across your very close together homes and homesteads or whatever. And then some bad dudes that used to be tech bros till it bottomed out. They come around town and they come start fucking with our community. And now all of a sudden you got Westerns again, totally modern movies, but they're Westerns again because of how you guys have chosen to be so agrarian.
Yep.
Oh my God, dude.
It's interesting. It's an interesting possibility.
I mean,
Look, I think outside of the subject matter, I will say I would like to see media in general and culture in general embrace the promise of super niches in that it becomes less about like, let me get obsessed with the product and more about let me get obsessed with the creators. And I
yeah.
think if social media is doing anything good for us, and I don't think it's doing a lot, but it is recentering focus on the people who are doing the work. And a lot of it may be completely infantile garbage, and a lot of it is completely disposable. And I hope that we can crawl our way out of that. But like, again, looking at comics as an example, I think comics as an art form will continue. I think it would only be good if writers and artists were the real main draw, as opposed to Thor and Spider-Man and whatever the fuck else. So I would apply that across the board, in movies. And I think we're starting to see a little bit of it here and there. It's like A24 just continues coming on strong, slowly but surely. And like all of those movies and now TV shows feel so much like remnants of the 70s and the early 80s, like before the blockbuster was sort of the de rigueur thing. And it was more about like, let's find young, weird, talented people who could do something strange on screen, and it's like, those are, when that becomes mainstream, that's when things get exciting, when that attitude becomes mainstream.
Yeah, I agree. And I just got to say, I'm really happy with what we're doing here, guys. I feel like every time we have an episode, I'm like proud of you guys being my friends, and proud of the thoughts and ideas that we have, that we listen to each other, that we come up with cool ideas, that I even think we're some of those dudes. I think we can be those dudes who bring you something interesting, put different ideas into your brain, and inspire other people and inspire ourselves to keep getting bigger and bigger. And I just love how cool this 100th episode turned out to be. That was really fun.
I do want to point out, I just want to point out too that while this is the 100th episode of The Greatest Pod, if you look at the fact that we also did 150 episodes of the previous show, Nerd Goat, this is our 250th episode together, guys. Like,
that's pretty amazing.
Wow.
Plus Patreon content, of which there is not an insignificant amount.
That's
right.
Yeah,
I mean, there's years of Patreon, patreon.com/The Greatest Pod. We are participating in this new economy, patreon.com/The Greatest Pod. We have so many different things on there that encompass some of the ways that nerddom was being redefined as, we perceived it in real time. So you can go back to our early recordings and just kind of track everything. Like, we started before phase 2 or 3 of Marvel. So it's like we have so much stuff on there, and I won't call it content. God dang it. I started slipping and calling it content. I started slipping up. These fucking Zoomers done got me to not consider our stuff art.
I gotta tell you though, I am a content creator now for Raid Shadow Legends. I am now making Raid Shadow Legends videos. And if you guys like Raid Shadow Legends at all, go follow my YouTube channel, Ron Swallow, and follow us on The Greatest Pod. I'm turning all of these into videos now, and they're coming out great, and I think they're really interesting. So get on there as well on our YouTube channel and follow us. And you can email us, by the way. You can email us to leave us a message. If you can't leave a review on Apple Pods or something like that, go ahead and email us at emailthegreatestpod@gmail.com.
Also, I just want you to acknowledge the fact that you're just being weak by saying you can't leave us a review. You could log in there one time, make a fake identity, and give us a 5-star review. You do not have to be part of their machine forever.
Yeah.
You don't have to sell your soul to give us a freaking review, and that review would really help us in the algorithm. But I want to go back to the email.
Think about what Joe Rogan would say if you didn't get off your ass and leave a review for The Greatest Pod. I don't know.
If there's one thing you take away from this podcast, let it be the grind set. You know what I mean? You need a grind set.
Oh God! Hey, I haven't lifted enough weights to buy into that yet. It's coming though. I'm listening to David Goggins on the way to the gym. Stop being a bitch. But
does that work for you?
Honestly, look. The one thing that culture has said that is absolutely true. And David Goggins said it. Anytime you say, I don't want to do this, I don't want to do that, and it's something really trivial, just record yourself saying that and then listen to it and realize what a little bitch you were being, because it'll stand in high relief. Inside your own mind, all your excuses are really cool. but when they're said out loud, they're pretty whack. Hustle culture, baby, they got me. It's like the end of a horror movie. Like I showed this Gary V bite that I got at the gym. I was just trying to take a shower. These hustle guys came and they bit me, and now I got some land in Bitcoin world.
You just keep cutting to shots of me and Ron, and our faces become more and more horrified. Our eyes just like, oh God, no.
So don't be a bitch. Buy my app. It tells you how to buy Bitcoin. I'm also doing some video about how Elk's blood helps you not be. You know, it's.
You don't have to go to school to learn how to code. Just read a book, you little bitch. We did get an email from a fan. We would love to read that on air. Go ahead, Bill.
That we did. It begins, "Good day, gentlemen," which is a very high class greeting.
Yes, thank you.
You never cease to impress. Every time you add a new style or format to your work, it is an improvement. I don't know how much work you all do, quote, behind the scenes to work these things out, but I can't think of an instance where you didn't show up with a polished, fully realized concept. The latest episode, where Ed and Bill went through the career of Frank Whiteley, was magic. Bill's enthusiasm for his work, with just a hint of gushing, oh, thank you, really sold. I was hoping I wasn't gushing too much. Really sold the excitement of discussing it in this format. The discussion was brilliant and so much fun to watch/listen to. I vote for many, many more of these. If I may presume to suggest an artist, I'd recommend considering Mike Mignola for the next one of these that you do. Solid choice. Many think of his art as being very simplistic, but that's quite far from the reality. Oh,
it's true.
Goddamn true.
Yeah.
Studying the layouts, page designs is a masterclass in storytelling by evoking an emotion or tone for the scene. Furthermore, the nature of the stark black and white shapes betray a cubist structure underneath that could easily become confusing black splotches by a lesser artist, as many have done. Anyway, I think this art style would make a very nice juxtaposition to the style and discussion of Whiteley's career. What a fabulously erudite letter.
Seriously.
Yeah. So now he's got side notes to each of us individually. Side note to Bill. I've really enjoyed the latest pieces you've been posting to Instagram, your, quote, speed work. Personally, I prefer it in some ways. It's got a lot of vibrancy and life to it. Keep up the great work. Looking forward to that graphic novel. Well, thank you. Side note to Ed. Your art is great. It doesn't need to be someone else's art, just Ed's. Make that comic. Is that referring to a caption you posted?
No, this person has been listening to us for long enough for me to be like, when you did the last batch of Patreon stuff, which, by the way, I got a Batman print coming. I think Bill will donate something to the cause, and we'll ship that out.
A passable Spider-Man that looks like a 9-year-old Drew.
So those three will be the postcards you get for the top tier of the Patreon. We'll send those via mail in the next couple of weeks. But basically, I had said the last time I saw some of your drawings, it kind of just froze me because I was like, oh, I'll never be as great as Bill, you know. And it was just, but it's just like that sort of, again, that's some punk shit though. That's stupid. Imagine if Mike Mignola looked at Frank Frazetta paintings and thought that and tried to make them in drawing form and made a style. You know what I'm saying? There's nothing farther in the world from Frank Frazetta than Mike Mignola, and he's a genius right on par with him. So I should thank you so much, person. This is what's the person's name? We'll get to that.
We'll get there. So finally, side note to Ron. Missed you this week for the Frank Whiteley discussion. Hope karaoke was fun. I'm guessing you played a Journey song? ?
Someone did sing Journey? Yes, 100%. You can count on that for every karaoke that ever happens.
I would assume so. Yeah. So anyway, it closes. Enough nonsense from me. Thank you all for the great entertainment. Always makes my week a bit better. From Matt Robinson. P.S. Did you get that P.O. box yet? Get on it. We do need to do that.
Still haven't gotten the P.O. box.
Thank you, Matt Robinson. Thank you, Matt. Yes, we're gonna do that. I mean, people just really want to send us razor bombs. I think this is fine.
Nothing wrong with it. Nothing wrong at all.
I don't need these hands anyways. You've seen how I draw.
Well, you'll be in charge of opening up all the packages.
What if I lose my hands and I start drawing with my feet, and it turns out I needed to draw with my feet the entire time?
Dude, I'll tell you what. There's going to be a whole a whole drama behind the scenes of me being super jealous of you for being the like art star of us now with no hands.
Oh my god, that would be so funny.
I'll be like a Phantom of the Opera dropping sandbags on your fucking ass.
You know,
Get
I
him out of
didn't
here.
never understood perspective until I started drawing with my feet.
Dude, this motherfucker be drawing like Kim Jong-ji with his feet. He's drawing perfect cityscapes and cars and perspective and shit. Oh my god.
Oh.
But thank you guys for being part of this hilarity. Thank you guys for being part of this joyous 100th episode. And as always, we sign off with this has been a centennial. Yeah. That's right. I fucked up the rest of it though. Centennial. Okay, each of us will do one word. It has been a centennial. Bill, you go next.
Milestone.
Hundreds.
Episode of the greatest pod. I think that might have been on the same time.
That was pretty great.
Love it.